Today, the update is talking to Mukesh Kapila, who has served as a special advisor to the UNCHR and as the UN top official in Sudan, where he blew the whistle on the Darfur genocide. He was subsequently removed from this post in 2004, and he is now working as a special representative to the Aegis Trust, who works to oppose crimes of genocide and crimes against humanity. Thank you for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So I'd like to go back to when you were head of the UN in Sudan. So you've explained what occurred in Darfur in 2003. Could you tell us why you blew the whistle and what was the response from your superiors in the UN?
Well, my journey inside Sudan actually started 10 years previously when I was in Rwanda. I happened to be in Rwanda in 1994, and I witnessed at first hand the Rwandan genocide. So I swore at the time that if ever I was in a similar situation again of witnessing genocide, I would do something about it. And then by chance, I happened to find myself not just in Sudan, but as the head of the United Nations in the Sudan, knowing that the UN had failed so miserably in Rwanda 10 years previously. So I determined, as soon as I had all the information I needed, to be sure that what I was dealing with in Darfur were acts of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, that I had to draw the world's attention to it. But when I tried to draw the world's attention through normal diplomatic channels, in other words, writing to my bosses in New York at the UN headquarters and trying to draw the attention of the powerful countries, members of the Security Council, the UK, France, US, and so on, they were not interested in knowing. And having done my diplomatic best to draw this to the attention of world decision makers through normal channels, there was only one option left open to me if I was to do anything to ensure that the never again that we had promised in Rwanda, but was happening again in Darfur, could be stopped. It was I had to speak up. And you know, when the world's leaders will not listen to you, then one has to speak to the world's peoples. And the only way to speak to the world's people is through the media. And that's what I was forced to do in the end.
You've expressed dissatisfaction with Barack Obama's actions or lack thereof relating to Sudan. What are your expectations under a Trump administration?
Well, first to say about Barack Obama, when he came into power, considering what candidate Obama had said about Sudan and what they were going to do about it, and then when candidate Obama turned into President Obama, we were all very optimistic that there would be some definitive action taken to bring the genocidal regime of al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, to its heels, and to bring justice and accountability for the long-suffering people of Darfur. And as the years of the Obama administration went on, it was very clear that nothing of the sort was going to happen. In fact, the opposite happened. In fact, slowly, Sudan was brought in from the cold. The sanctions against the country were slowly downgraded. And the genocidaires were actually getting rewarded. Now, with Trump coming into power recently, we are waiting. My expectations are zero, simply because it's not so much about Trump. It is about a hard lesson I have learned in 30 years of an international career. And that is that the expectations that we often have from our leaders are often disappointed. And having been a student of disappointment, I think I would say I'm a postgraduate student in disappointment, and seeing dreams turn to ashes all the time, promises being dishonored, I don't have great expectations from the Trump administration.
So moving away from Sudan, Myanmar is a predominantly Buddhist country which is currently under scrutiny for its treatment of the Rohingya Muslims in the west of the country. How would you characterize the events taking place there? And do you think that they could develop into a repeat of the events that occurred in Rwanda?
Well, what's going on in Burma, Myanmar is utterly appalling. And the other noticeable thing is that it's happening in glaring daylight, because we're living in the age of digital media, we're living in the age of the internet, and unlike ancient history in the Holocaust or even in Rwanda, not so ancient, but still 20 years ago, where things happened in the darkness and we only came to know about them afterwards. What happened in Darfur and what is happening in Myanmar are happening with full information available to us at any time. The second and very disappointing fact about the whole situation in Burma is that Aung San Suu Kyi, who we all adored and who herself was a victim of oppression and injustice, living in prison for so long. And I even remembered as a university student in Oxford, knowing her husband and agitating for her freedom. She has been completely silent, or more or less silent, on the issue of the Rohingyas. So when the leaders of a country turn their backs on their own people, then I think there is not much hope, at least in that quarter. So all I can say about Burma and the Rohingyas is that be prepared for much more suffering to take place. I don't think there is the appetite or the capacity for external intervention. The other thing, but sooner or later this situation will be resolved and history will extract its dues in a way. But suffering, and even more suffering, is probably going to happen.
So speaking of external intervention, do you believe that the UN and other major actors on the international stage, such as the UK and the US, are intentionally refraining from labeling evident genocides as such so that they're not obliged to intervene?
Under the Genocide Convention, if a genocide is suspected or declared, there is an international legal obligation to intervene. This is what we discovered as a legacy of the Holocaust. But in today's world, it's getting more and more difficult to intervene. And as we have known from all the problems of Iran, of Iraq, of Libya, and so on, that when you intervene, you don't necessarily make things better. So especially in the ways we intervene, very often we create new enemies and we destroy a place quite easily, but we somehow do not have the capabilities to give new birth, new development to a place, recovery to a place. So that's one of the reasons why the world is more and more reluctant to intervene unless there is a direct national threat to itself, a country. And in the case of genocide, nobody wants to declare genocide because this is the mother and father of all crimes. This is the ultimate crime. And to declare that invokes automatic mechanisms which no country has the political will to follow through on. And this is why the original crime that had no name, which then was called genocide by Lemkin, the founder, is ironically now turning into a crime with a name which no one wants to name.
So during your 2013 TED Talk, you mentioned that if the world's governments will not listen to you, you would speak to the world's people through the media in order to gain traction on the issue of Sudan. So this evidently gives the media huge power over humanitarian issues. And we've seen the impact of the lack of media coverage on Yemen. What role do you think the media should play in setting humanitarian agendas?
I think the media is an extremely important mirror onto the world. And if it were not for the media, we would not know about the injustices and oppressions, little and large, all over the world. And this has been true across time and space, through history. Unfortunately, the media cannot be everywhere. And the reason there was no media in the case of Darfur in my time at the beginning, or in Yemen, as you say now, is because the governments of those countries restrict media access, and it's very difficult to get there. And media organizations themselves are under huge budgetary constraints, so they are not able to cover everything everywhere, really. What that means is that we have to move on from being reliant on one set of media, the Western media, the big media reporters or agencies, or radios and televisions, and actually turning everyone into media. Of course, these are what we see on Twitter and Facebook and citizen journalists and so on. That is already happening in many, many places. The risk of that, of course, is a lot of false news and propaganda that is also coming about, and the objectivity has been lost. So this is why it's important to consume media coming from very different channels and sources, not to rely on one source. But I think there's no easy answers to this, other than that every citizen, everywhere, has a duty to be able to connect and communicate what they know, hopefully truth, to everyone around them and outside. But the media will remain an extremely important form of being able to know what's going on. But the shape of that media will continue to evolve and change. There are also new potentials and opportunities. So I think what we're seeing now also is democratization of the media, not just one channel or one point of view. If you listen to Al Jazeera, you'll get a completely different point of view than if you listen to CNN.
So, as you already know, the International Criminal Court has called for the arrest of Omar al-Bashir, the Sudanese president, in 2010. But the ICC is currently facing criticism from some of its own members, such as South Africa and Gambia, who accuse the court of having an institutional bias against African leaders and have subsequently decided to withdraw from the court. In your opinion, do they have legitimate grounds to do so?
I don't think they have legitimate grounds to withdraw. And all the countries that have withdrawn or are threatening to withdraw, they have good reasons of self-interest to do so. Yes, certainly many of the cases, or if not most of the cases in front of the ICC, are African. But we must remember that it is the Africans themselves who have referred those cases. And so when South Africa did what it did, which is not arrest Bashir when Bashir came to South Africa, and itself then withdraw, the only signal it's sending is that it's got something to hide, that it's got some own self-interest to preserve and protect. When you talk to African people and African communities, they thank the stars for the International Criminal Court. The reason we have an International Criminal Court is because national courts are not strong enough, or they cannot be trusted enough to bring justice. When the day comes when domestic courts will become strong and fearless and be able to actually protect the rights of their citizens, then the role of the International Criminal Court will be over. In fact, the International Criminal Court only acts in cases when normal national jurisdiction is unable to do the job. Now, if Sudan were to prosecute Bashir itself, there'd be no need for Bashir to appear before the International Criminal Court.
So, do you think the international humanitarian system needs to evolve as a response to Western populists such as Donald Trump, who have threatened to cut aid and a general lack of funding?
Well, I have a kind of nuanced view of this. I think the international humanitarian system, as we see it, it's become a business. It's become an industry. It's become a place where people go to pursue careers, where humanitarians have become rock stars, where rock stars have used the humanitarian business to project their own brand. You only have to look at George Clooney in the way he has used Sudan to project his own brand, but hasn't solved anything on the ground. So I'm in favor of actually changing the international humanitarian system. You may not be expecting this answer from me, but I think it's a very good idea if Trump was to cut some American funding to the international organizations which have become too bloated, which have become too self-serving. Please remember that most humanitarian action takes place at the ground level with local people helping their neighbors. By the time international aid arrives, it's often too little, too late. So to create a world humanitarian system, which we have done, and before I'm accused of hypocrisy, I've made a very good career out of it also. We have to realize that this humanitarian industry, business, that's what it is, is based on the misery and misfortune of ordinary people who cannot choose for themselves how they want to be served. So the World Humanitarian Summit that took place last year in Istanbul, and I was advisor for that, really brought this discussion to a crunch. A system which is dependent on the arbitrary charity of other nations is not a system that we want to perpetuate. After all, the word humanitarian contains the word human in it. And human means, the definition of being human means to have dignity, to have self-respect. And the way the humanitarian system works is this charitable giving of starving people and all the images you see on the screen. This actually dehumanizes people. So I'm actually looking forward to the day when we cut our humanitarian funding very significantly. It doesn't mean to say running away from needs, but it means reorienting the way we think of suffering and doing much more to help suffering people through their own efforts in their own place rather than from outside. And I think, I'm no supporter of the Trump administration, and I think his slash and burn approach, just cut willy-nilly, clearly would be very, very damaging. But greater efficiency and effectiveness would certainly be in good order. And this is a wake-up call for the international humanitarian community to look at itself again and reinvent itself in a more appropriate manner.
Finally, after seeing so much death and destruction, how do you still retain hope in a world where many people seem to turn a blind eye against crimes against humanity?
Let me answer the question by telling you a story. A couple of years ago, I was in the Blue Nile province of Sudan, where again there's an ethnic conflict going on. So I was talking to a local woman who had been displaced from her house, and she was telling me her story on how she had been raped, her daughter had been raped, and all the terrible things that had happened to her community deep in the bush where I was interviewing them. And then at the end of our chat, I said to her, I'm very sorry for all your troubles. Thanks for speaking to me. What can I do to you? What can I do for you? Knowing full well that I really couldn't do very much for her. It was a somewhat stupid question to ask. She paused for a moment and then she said, look at me, and turned to my cameraman and asked him, take a good picture of me. Look at my face. Show my photo all over the world. Tell the whole world my story. Because my greatest worry is that I'm born here, I'm raped here, I'm starved here, I'm made miserable here, and no one knows what's happening to me. So it's not my suffering that's the issue. It's the fact that I have to suffer without the world knowing about it. So what that taught me was that she wanted to connect with the rest of the world and have her experience shared so that others could know of it and think about it and what it meant in their own context. Because that was Blue Nile province, but there are other Blue Niles and Darfurs all over the world, if you like. And what she projected to me was her huge optimism and her huge resilience and her huge hope. So that's the answer to your question. If someone like her, struggling in the bush, in Blue Nile, with all that had happened to her, could remain optimistic for the future, not only optimistic, but struggling to recreate a future, despite everything that happened to her and her daughter, then I, who has the option to go in and out, to walk away or go, had no right to be pessimistic. So pessimism, and worse still, cynicism, are a luxury for people like you and I, who can sit down in comfort, as we are doing now, and think about these things. Should we be optimistic? Should we be pessimistic? For people like her, they have no choice. It's a daily reality. And these people survive and continue to resist evil. There's plenty of evil around the world, but it doesn't succeed. Because if it had succeeded, we would only be seeing evil now. Hitler never succeeded in the end, despite whatever carnage he caused. So this is why I remain optimistic. Not because one doesn't worry or sometimes get depressed or sometimes feel hopeless and helpless in the face of overwhelming evil and oppression that I go and see all the time in many, many places, recently around Syria. But it's the resilience of the survivors. Despite everything, people not just carry on, they're thinking about reconstructing themselves and making a better future. And as long as that remains, we who are privileged should support them and be infected by their optimism. That's the best way forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.